All right, so somebody left a comment on one of my mixing videos and said, Ed, can you do a vid on live drum mixing? Right, and I told you, you leave comments in the comment section, you never know. I just might do a video about it, and this is one of those times. Let's talk about mixing live drums.
At McCray Music.
Okay, guys, how are you doing? I am richly blessed. I pray that you are as well. All right. So I'm going to deal with the mixing part of live drums in another video. And the reason why I'm going to do that as a separate video is because before we can mix live drums, we need to deal with the editing of live drums. And editing of live drums is a completely different beast as opposed to synth drums, mainly because we are recording things acoustically, and so we have to deal with bleed, we have to deal with phase, and just other things that you would not have to deal with in a synth drum setting. So this video is going to focus strictly on the editing of our live drums. I'm going to deal with just editing the waveforms a bit. I'm also going to deal with the use of triggering, right? Should we use it? When should we use it? How do we use it? And all that kind of thing. I'll show you an example of that. And then we'll cover the actual mixing of the live drums in another video when I get to the point, because the song that I'm using the live drums for just so happened that someone sent me I'm working on a song with live drums in it right now, but we're not at the mixing phase yet. So when we get to the mixing phase of that song, I'll do another video and actually show you how I mixed those live drums into that song. Before we get into this video on editing live drums, please leave a like on this video. Please feel free to subscribe to this channel as well so that you know when new videos are coming out. And without further ado, let's get into some live drum editing. Let's do it. All right, guys, let's edit some live drums here. Now, let's look at what we've got. We've got a pair of overheads, common setup, a pair of overheads. We have a rack tom here, another rack tom, a floor tom, a snare, and a kick, okay? Now, I typically like to set all these things up for you so you can watch me doing everything. But in this particular case, the song that I'm working on, we had a drum take already at the beginning of the production process in our pre-production. But then after kind of finalizing or starting to finalize production, we decided that we wanted to go back and get another drum take to kind of clean some things up. There were some things that were added during production, some different hits and things like that that needed to be played. So he did another drum take and sent it back. So that's why there's some stuff already here. You'll see some plugins that are already here. If I go to my mix view, you'll see there are already some plugins and things here. I'll explain what each thing is. I have everything off right now. So we're basically outside of hearing some gaining that I did, hearing just the raw drum take that was sent back to me. Also, you can see that there's some trigger tracks here. Well, those are muted right now. We're going to talk about that towards the end of our process here. All right. So these are acoustic drums. So when you're editing and dealing with acoustic drums or live drums present a different set of challenges because they're recorded acoustically. So unlike synthetic drums, right, where, you have complete control over everything, it's a dry sound, right? So if you want to put it in a space, you can. You're not dealing with bleed from other microphones. Here, these are drums recorded in a room, in a space, and so you're dealing with whatever is going on in that space, right? If the space was treated properly, if it wasn't, right, you're dealing with that, right? Your room is always an instrument, so we're dealing with that. But then we're also dealing with bleed, right? What is bleed? Bleed is when sound from other sources bleed into the microphone that you're using to record a particular source, all right? And you're going to get a ton of this with drums. And it's not all bad, but we do want to control it. But let's just listen to just the raw drum take here, and I'll just give you my impressions of the things that I know I'm going to need to do to get this sounding the way that it's going to need to sound when it is time for mixing. Again, we're not worried about mixing right now, but we always want to think in terms of mixing. So even though I'm just in the editing and production phase, I'm still doing things with mixing in mind so that when I get to the mix, right, I have less work to do because certain things were taken care of earlier on. So let's just listen. I just have a portion of this song selected. Let's hear what we got. good drum take. Okay, so my thoughts on this. We have some things that we need to deal with, obviously. We need to deal with and go through and deal with some bleed to tighten up the drum sound. Okay, and that's going to be easy or easier with the kick and the snare. It's not going to necessarily be as easy with the toms. So we'll talk about different ways to deal with that. So that's one thing. Um, I'm probably gonna end up quantizing some things here. I don't know that I'm gonna do that in this video because I'm still making up my mind if I want to do that at all. And as a producer, that's something that you want to think about and consider. All right. I don't want you to get in the mindset of immediately quantizing everything. If you're not familiar with what quantizing is, it's making your sounds match up exactly with the grid. So if the timing is 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, right? And you have hits and things that are going on. Quantizing is going to make it line up exactly with that grid. Sometimes you're going to want that. Sometimes, to be honest, you're not because it takes away from the feel of the song. And one of my gripes with a lot of music today, especially in the gospel world, the Christian world, is sometimes we kind of produce the soul and the life out of music because we tune everything. Every vocal is tuned absolutely perfect. Every hit, every instrument is quantized absolutely perfect. And that's just not real life, right? So sometimes it's good to leave stuff unquantized. Sometimes it's good to not tune your vocals perfectly because it adds character and it adds growth and it doesn't sound so robotic. So I honestly haven't made up my mind if I want to quantize these yet on this song. I probably will do in some places and not in other places. Places where maybe something is really off, I'll adjust it, but I don't quite know yet. So we're not going to touch that here. But that is something that's in my mind. And then the overall sound of the drums, right? Let's just listen one more time. Drum sound is cool, but it's a little dull, right? It's a little boomy, and so it's going to get lost in the mix, right? So we're going to need to kind of crisp some things up, and we're going to use some triggering to do that. But before we even get to that, we're going to play around with the actual sounds that we have, okay? So let's start by dealing with some of this bleed stuff. Now, with our kick and snare, let's solo the kick and deal with that. Typically, with kicks and snares, we can very easily, and actually I think I have it on already, so I'm gonna turn it off. Yeah, I had it on for the kick, not the snare. With kicks and snares, we can typically very easily deal with bleed by using a gate, right? A gate is simply a tool that we can use to filter out unwanted noise, okay? We set a threshold. When a noise is or a sound is above that threshold or hits that threshold, the gate opens to let the sound out. And then after amount of time that we configure called release, right? So it's kind of similar to a compressor, really, if you think about it. We have a threshold, right? We have an attack. We have a release, right? A lot of similar things you'd find in a compressor. So it opens the gate to let the sound out. And then after our release time, it closes the gate. Real simple, right? There are lots of different gates here. I have on this kick track, let's listen to the kick without the gate. Okay. We can hear we can hear the snare, we can hear the cymbals, which is not necessarily a problem, but it kind of makes everything blend, it makes everything muddy, right? And so by gating this and getting rid of that bleed, it's going to tighten the drum sound up a little bit. The particular gate that I'm using here is from Slate Digital. You're shocked, I'm sure. But I really like this gate. And again, there are other gates. Whatever works for you is great. In Logic, there is a gate plugin built in. But this is pretty cool. This is a Slate gate specifically for drums. Slate gate, that rhymed. And we can see here that I've got the transient. I've got first of all, the threshold kind of down a little bit. I've got the transient detection about mid. We can see that I have the range way up and I have the release at a fairly quick release. And if I turn this on, let's see what we get. So this is it with it out, and then I will engage it. Engaged. Much better. Much better, right? Again, here's it without. Let's engage it. That's what I want my kick sounding like, right? Now, I still have, because there's a cymbal in there or a hi-hat, something that's happening there at the same time as the kick, that's going to be in there. That's fine. But this immediately tightens that up, all right? Let's look at the snare because I have that going on for the snare as well. Let's engage. Now, if this one is not going to be as perfect, but it is getting some of that out there. Now, the reason why I don't have it as tight is because he's doing some ghost notes and things in there, so I want those to be in there. I do want a little bit of the ring of the snare to be out of there. That's another reason why gating is cool, right? Your snares can really have like a nasty ring in there. Snares and toms too can have a nasty ring in there. So using your gate can kind of help. Let's kind of tune this a little bit more. I think I'm going to extend the release just a little bit more. And we need to address the threshold too. That kick is in there. All right, that feels good to me. Again, it's not going to be perfect. I'm not trying to get rid of everything. I don't want you to think of all bleed as a bad thing. It's a part of the sound of your drums. If we were in a live setting, right, that bleed, unless you're using gates and things on your console, that bleed would be there. Okay. All right, now the issue that we end up having is dealing with that with the toms. But before we get to that, let's kind of play around with the sound of our kick and our snare a little bit. Now, I had some things that were on here. He re-recorded this on the same kit, so these should still work, but we might tune things a little bit more. Let's look at the kick here and see what we've got working. It looks like I have a EQ here where I'm kind of adding some bump to the kick, pulling out some mid-range and pulling out some things going on in the top end. I have a transient shaper here where it looks like I was using that to add a little bit of attack and using this to pull some of the end off. So I was probably using this to help with the gating a little bit. But we'll see what that's doing. And then I've got, what's this? I've got the solid state compressor or solid state channel strip rather here, which I honestly don't know why I used this here. This is not typically something that I would use. Maybe I was just experimenting with it. And I'm using this for the compressor. I don't know what I'm using this for actually. Oh, you know what? I think I decided to add a little bit of top to it because I don't see anything going on with the compressor. So I think maybe I chose to use this to add a little top to that. I honestly don't know why this is here. We'll find out. We'll see what it's doing. But the only thing I see happening is I'm adding a little bit of top there. So maybe I just decided to play around with a new plugin that day. All right. But let's start engaging these things one at a time and let's see what they're doing. Here we go. We'll do our EQ first. Engage. So it's a little bit of shaping, little subtle shaping, adding some bottom to it. And like I said, getting rid of some things that I was hearing in the top end there. I think that's fine. That's fine. That hi-hat's going to be in there. There's nothing I can do about that. Let's add our transient shaper. Wrong one. Giving you a sneak peek into what's going on with the snare. Let's add this in. Just adding a little subtle attack and getting rid of some of that residue that the gate was not getting. And then let's turn on our channel strip. Yeah, we're just using this again. Yeah, and you know what? I probably used this and started to do some compression, and then I changed my mind because I could have just used an EQ plugin to do this. But it's adding some nice top end there. Let's listen. That's nice. That's nice. All right, so we got a nice sound there. Let's listen to our snare and how the let's just listen to the snare by itself. And on the snare, I've actually got a couple of things here. We've got our gate already. I have, and this is my favorite transient plugin, which again makes me believe on the kick, I was just playing around with some different things. This is the Native Instruments Transient Master, and we can see I'm doing a similar thing here with the snare. I'm adding a little attack, getting rid of some of the residue there. And then we've got an EQ where I'm just rolling off some low end and I'm getting rid of something in the mid range here, the low mids. And then I have another thing here, but this was to deal with that along with the trigger, which we'll talk about in a moment. And I have some more EQ there, and I have the transient master there as well. So we're not going to worry about that right now, because that might completely change depending on what we do with our trigger. Let's just hear what this sounds like. All right, sounding good, right? So it's getting rid of some stuff. Those ghost notes are not extremely important to me. When you hear this in the context of the rest of the song, you'll understand why. But we might throw some compression on there to bring those out a little bit. Let's hear the kick and the snare together. All right, this is a good start, right? Again, we're cleaning some things up. We're starting to shape a little bit of a sound. That is cool. All right, now, the bane of our existence is going to be toms because oftentimes your tom mics are going to give you the most bleed out of everything, right? Your kick mic, it's like you're going to get more bleed as you move up the set, right? So your kick mic is down low. You're not going to get as much bleed there. Your snare is a little higher, so you're going to get a little more of the cymbals and the hi-hats and stuff. Your toms are a little higher up, so you're going to get everything. You're going to get the kick in there. You're going to get the snare in there. You're going to get all of the toms in there and you're going to get the cymbals and stuff. So a gate typically for me is not going to get the job done when it comes to dealing with our toms. And so we are going to have to go in and manually edit out our toms, which can be a bit of a beast. All right. So let's take a look here and let's just solo all of our toms here. And let's see what we are getting. You hear how the boominess immediately comes in? You know why? Because you're getting the bleed from the kick. The kick is actually resonating in the tom. And so you're hearing that where it's not actually a tom hit, right? So we got to get that out of there. Let's solo some of these by themselves just so you can hear what's going on. Here's our floor tom is especially going to be bad with that. Right, so actually it's not the floor tom, it's one of the rack toms. You hear all that? None of that is a tom hit, folks. That's all bleed. So we got to deal with all that. How about this tom right here? So this one is the biggest culprit with the ringing, right? All right, so we're gonna have to deal with that. Okay, now let's talk about this. So I do have a gate here, and I think this was kind of just cleaning up some of the residue at the end. But in the past, I had actually edited all the toms, which is what it pained my soul to say, bro, I think we need to do another take because that means I got to do all the editing of the toms all over again. This is why I need an assistant, right? I need y'all to subscribe to this channel so that we can start monetizing and I can pay an assistant to come in here and do some of these things for me because I don't want to do it. But let's see what this gate is doing. And this is ultimately the problem with and why I find you cannot gate toms is because the snare is going to typically be at a similar level of transient to the as the toms, and so you're the snare and possibly the kick too is gonna trigger the gate, and so that's not what we want. All right. So what we have to do, and I'm not going to make you guys sit through this whole process. I'll just show you an example of this. Um, what I'm going to have to do is, and I'll just do it with this one right here. Let's really zoom in on this. And we're going to have to find, so I can see these are some tom hits right here. So this is actually a good example. I don't know if he hits that tom again down here. So we can see that's there. So what I'm going to do is we could listen. So this is what the tom sounds like. Boom, boom, right? That's what we want. So what I'm going to need to do is come through here and find the next tom hit. Now, there are a couple things I can do. In Logic, we can tab to transient a couple different ways, right? In Pro Tools, you would just hit the tab key and it would tab you to the beginning of the next transient. In Logic, I'm going to hold Control and I can hit my period to move me forward to the transient's beginnings, or I can hit the Control comma to move me backwards. Okay, so that's one thing that we could do. Another thing that we can do is I can find what I want. So this is clearly a tom hit right here. Let's turn that cycle off. That's clearly a tom hit right there. So what I can do is I can use the marquee tool, and I have the marquee tool set up here as my optional tool. So I'm going to hold Command, and it gives me my marquee tool, and I can highlight, and then I can hold Shift and tap my left arrow, and it'll bring me to the beginning. Let me do that again. So I'm going to get my marquee tool. I'm going to go to the end. So I probably want it to end right around here, a little bit before the cymbal crash. I'm going to highlight this, and then I'm going to do Shift left arrow to get to the beginning of the transient, and then I'm going to click, and it separates that out, right? And so now we can kind of roll this off. I'm going to come here, and I'm going to just cut this off. Just going to cut that right there. Just get that up out of there. Okay. And now this is what we've got. All right. So now what we need to do is we need to do some crossfading so it's clean. All right. So I'm going to switch to my fade tool. I use that as an optional tool as well. And I'm going to just go ahead and we're going to just fade a little bit at the end and even less at the beginning. And I think we'll move this up a little bit. Let's see. And let's fade it a little bit more. A little bit more. There we go. That's what we want. Beautiful. So now this is now going to be completely silent until it gets to that hit. Beautiful. All right. So you said, Ed, that don't seem that bad. Yeah, it doesn't. But guess what? I get to do that for all of this. And I get to do it for this tom, and the floor tom. And like I said, I'm not going to have you guys sit through all of that, right? You'll hear the finished product when that happens. Probably when it's time to mix, I'll let you hear the finished product. All right, but that's what we have to do with toms. Okay, so these are the challenges that live drums present. All right, now let's talk about triggering a little bit, and we'll end this video on that. All right, because like I said, I'm not going to make you guys sit here while I do all of this. Triggering, and this is something that is being used all the time. All right, triggering basically allows me to use a plugin to swap a sample or have the actual hit of the drum trigger a sampled drum. All right, and so to do a trigger, what we're going to do, and I already have created a triggered track. What we're going to do is basically just create a new track, or really technically what you're going to do is just duplicate whatever instrument you are trying to trigger. So I want to trigger my kick. I would just duplicate it. I deleted it, so I'm going to add it back in, right? So here's my trigger track. I'm going to put that same kick on that trigger track. I'm going to trigger my snare as well. Ultimately, I'm going to trigger my toms, but I'm going to do that after I edit them, okay? You can use triggering to replace drums. Sometimes your drum recording is going to be really bad, but you want to use the musicianship, but just the sound of it is just not going to work, or it's going to take too much work for you to clean it up. We can just trigger it to replace drums, right? Or typically what I like to do, and what I'm going to do in this case, is blend a triggered drum in with the actual recorded drum to maybe add some more of what I don't have. So add some more bite, add some more roundness or bottom or whatever it is that I want, all right? So the plugin that I like to use, and I think that is pretty common in the industry, is Slate Trigger. So let's pull up Slate Trigger right here. And this is Slate Trigger. So basically, we have our triggered, or we have our wave file on this channel. And then what I can do is I can choose a sample or a number of samples that I want to use to, with that particular sound, right? I want it to trigger that sample. And the cool thing about it is we can blend this really well, right? So we could come in here and we can deal with the volume of each trigger. We can deal with the tuning, panning. We can mute stuff, phase shifting, whatever it is we want to do, we can do. So let's listen to just the trigger here. I'm going to mute the original kick. Let's listen to just the triggered kick. The one that I'm using here, let's look at the sample that I'm using. This, I believe, is from the chord samples. I don't have a lot of trigger samples in here. I'm actually about to get some more, but I have like Andrew Masters' kit is in here, which is cool, and I have these core samples that came with a Slate Trigger too. You can create your own as well, but you have to use a particular software to create the triggered, the file format that it's going to accept. And so I'm probably going to end up doing some of that as well. But I have this Studio Kick Out, which I think is from Andrew Masters' kit. Yeah, Studio Kick Out. This is the sample that I'm using. So let's just listen to the trigger. What is that? That is really clean. That has some nice bottom to it. That has some nice punch to it, right? So it's really going to thicken up this kick. Let's listen to the original kick. Let's blend in the trigger. Let's mute the trigger. Add it back in. See how it's just thickening it up? It's giving it that more polished sound, right? And again, you can play around, and I'm going to play around with some different triggers here, some different samples. This is what I chose from the last take that he gave, but like I said, I'm getting ready to get some new stuff, so I'm going to play around with some other samples as well to get the sound that we want. Let's listen to that for the snare. I got the same thing happening here for the snare. Let's mute the kick here. Here's the original snare. Here's the triggered snare that I've got. So I wanted to add some more kind of some punch and some top end. You can see I actually have the transient plug in here as well, kind of adding actually I'm not adding any attack, but I'm pulling back a little bit on the triggered snare because it's a little resonant. Same thing here. I'm using this, and I actually have a couple of snares blended together here. I've got the Andrew Masters Studio Snare top and bottom, and then I've got a slate snare, and I've got them all blended together, right? Let's go ahead and listen to the original snare again, and then we'll add the triggered snare in. So it's adding a little bit more of that snare bottom as well. This particular recording did not have a snare top and bottom. It just had the snare top. This is cool because it's giving me that, and I'm remembering why I use this as well. It's giving me, I'm simulating that snare bottom, so I'm getting a little bit more of that resonance. So here's the now kick and snare together with the triggers. That sounds nice. Let's, I'm going to keep the other stuff muted, but let's just hear what that sounds like in the context of the song as a whole. And again, this is not a mix. This is just some raw production. Let's hear what it sounds like. Now let's hear what it would sound like without those triggers. Let's take the triggers out. See how it immediately punches through a little bit more, right? So that's how we're using triggering here in this case. So again, you could use triggers to completely replace drums. You could use triggers in this case to enhance them by blending them with the original recording, which is more the approach that I am taking here. All right, so I still got a lot of work to do. I want to play with some other samples. I also want to come through and I'm going to edit all these toms and things like that, and you will hear the finished product of the drums when we get to the mixing phase. I'll do a whole other video to talk about mixing live drums, and we'll see how we can really work these into the mix. Okay, I hope that that was helpful to you. Again, a lot of work, right? Especially when it comes to those toms. Like I said, there's just other things that we're considering here. Just getting the bleed out of the way and isolating down the actual drums that we want to use. Sometimes a gate is gonna work. In my experience, when it comes to like toms, gates are just not as efficient to me as going through and editing. I didn't make you sit through all of that in real time. It probably took me a good hour or so to actually edit out all of those different toms on all three of those different tom tracks. All right, so a lot of work, but it is worth it. Please feel free to leave some comments in the comment section. Do you have questions about anything that you saw in this video? Comments about things, maybe Ed, you could have done this a little bit differently, or you could have, there's an easier way to do this. Please let me know. Like I said, I always am not here to tell you, you must do it this way. That's a terrible robot, but you know, you get the idea. I'm here to show you how I'm doing stuff. Hopefully you can glean some things from that, but I love learning from you guys as well. So feel free to include that kind of stuff in the comment section as well. All right, we are going to mix those drums. I'll let you hear the finished product of that, and then we will deal with the actual mixing of those drums in another video. All right, you guys take care. Looking forward to seeing you in another video, my friends.